Hello, today we are going to be talking about public speaking. If you are scared of public speaking, then you are in good company. Americans, on surveys of their biggest fear, they always, since they've been doing it, they always put public speaking as their biggest fear. 74% of people rate public speaking as their biggest fear. So if you are nervous about speaking in public, it's totally normal. It's totally very, very common. Second biggest fear, death, which means that if you're at a funeral, most people would rather be in the coffin than giving the eulogy. And then we got spiders and stuff. Okay, so it is a good thing that so many people are scared of public speaking. It's a good thing it makes people so anxious, is because other people's weaknesses are your strengths. By the time you're done with this class and we've practiced public speaking, you're going to feel really confident with it. You're going to be really good at it. And so that's going to give you an edge over other people because you have this skill that they don't have. So it's good that people are scared of public speaking. You won't be one of them by the time we're done. We're going to talk about two aspects of successful public speaking today. We're going to talk about how to structure your presentation, and you'll see that the structure of your presentation is going to mirror the structure of a memo. And then we're going to talk about how you deliver with confidence and enthusiasm. So let's hop into it and talk about how to structure your presentation like a memo. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about today is that the structure of a presentation is exactly the same as the structure of a memo. So if you recall, when we talked about memos, we have an introduction where we convince our reader that this is important to them. We've got a thesis where we get across our main ideas, and this is right at the beginning of the paper. We summarize our main ideas like an executive summary. Then we got some body paragraphs where we flesh out our main ideas. And finally, we end with a conclusion where we reiterate our main points. This is the structure for memos. This is the structure for presentations. This is like a structure in which people like to receive information. If you know anything about music, this is also the structure of pop songs. So next time you're listening to the radio, when you listen to a pop song, they're going to do a little intro where they introduce you to the melody. And then there are 3 verses. And then there's a little outro where they play the melody again. And that structure, once you're aware of it, you start seeing it everywhere. It's a very common way to communicate information. So just like our memo, this is how we structure our presentations. We've got our introduction, and then we have a roadmap, which is like our thesis. We have our body, where we flesh out our main ideas, and then we have our conclusion, where we reiterate our main ideas. This is the old tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them structure. So this is the structure that I use for all of my presentations that we do throughout the semester, all my lectures, and I'll be using the feedback lecture as an example to kind of illustrate as I'm going through. So the first thing we need is an introduction. You want to use your introduction and convince your audience that they should care about whatever you're telling them about. Don't take it for granted that they're going to care. Personally appeal to them and show them why it's important. If you notice, I do this at the beginning of every single lecture. I usually spend a few slides before I actually get into the content, into the meat of it. I spend a few slides trying to convince you, hey, pay attention to this. This is useful. This is valuable to you in some way to get you engaged in the information that I'm going to present. So if you go back to my feedback lecture, I talk about how feedback is one of the most powerful ways to influence people. Most of us feel uncomfortable about it, and then we talked a little bit about why we feel uncomfortable about it and how to get over that. At the beginning of this lecture, I told you that most people are scared of public speaking and that it's going to be a strength. Other people's weaknesses are going to be a strength of yours. And I always do that at the beginning of lectures, just try and draw people in by making it personally relevant to them. So that's our introduction. The next thing we have is a roadmap. Now, in a memo, there's nothing we call a roadmap, but a thesis is essentially the exact same thing as a roadmap. I'm telling you what my main messages are, and I'm telling you the order in which I'm going to present them. And I always do this in my lectures as well. This is what my roadmap looks like. I don't call it a roadmap, or I don't call it to you guys a roadmap, but that's what it is, right? It's a roadmap where I lay out my main ideas. And for every lecture I do this. You'll notice that I use action headers. So I'm not just saying, hey, we're going to talk about trust, or hey, we're going to talk about time. I'm giving you the message. So I'm telling you, establish trust, pick an appropriate time, begin by listening. I'm giving you messages through the action header, not just listing the topics that we're going to talk about, but communicating the messages. And these are the most important parts of my lecture. These are the things that I test you guys on. These are the things that we practice in class. The main messages are what are communicated in my roadmap. If you remember nothing else from my lectures other than this slide, then I've done my job. That's what I'm trying to do. I know I format my roadmaps kind of funky. It's just the way that I do it. You do not have to copy that. I think it's ugly. But I think it's the most effective way to structure them that I've seen so far. But other students do it creatively. I don't care. Action headers are important to me, but the actual formatting is whatever you want to do, as long as it looks professional. Okay, so we have our introduction, we have our roadmap, and then we have our three main messages that we want to communicate. And it doesn't have to be three. Like with feedback, I've got 6. In this lecture on public speaking, I've got 2. But usually somewhere between 2 and 5. 6 is getting a little long. So we can see in my feedback lecture, these are some of the slides that represent those 6 different main messages that I'm trying to get across. So talking about establishing trust, talking about an appropriate time to give feedback, beginning by listening, praise more than you criticize, give smart feedback, and end by agreeing on SMART goals. And obviously that lecture is a lot more than 6 slides, but I've taken the first slide from each one to kind of illustrate how you build on and elaborate on your main messages through the body of the presentation, just like you do through the body of a memo. All right, and then lastly we have our conclusion. You want to conclude by reminding your audience what your message is and why they should care, right? So here's what I'm telling you and here's why it's important to you. I always end with my roadmap. So you'll notice that, I don't know, probably 99% of my lectures, they end with my roadmap, and I quickly go through my main points again. And I also try to connect them to why these are meaningful or why these are valuable. So that's just what I do for my conclusion. NPR sucks at introductions and conclusions. This is a slight pet peeve of mine. I'm a avid NPR listener. I know that's shocking that a professor in the Bay Area would listen to NPR. And they suck at introductions and conclusions. If you come if you start listening to your radio in the middle of an NPR segment, they'll say something like, yeah, it was a horrible tragedy. It's probably the worst thing that's ever happened here in the United States in our lifetime. And now over to Bob with traffic. And they don't bookend their segments. They don't go back and reiterate what they were talking about. And it is so frustrating because if you come in the middle of a segment, you can listen to the last half of it even, and it's so hard to figure out what they're talking about. So don't be like NPR. Have little bookends, right, where you introduce all of your main topics and then you end by reiterating your main points. So this is the traditional way to structure presentations, just like we structure a memo. We have an introduction where we grab our audience's attention and explain why this is important to them. We have a roadmap where we lay out our main points, like an executive summary, right, like a thesis statement. We have our 3 body paragraphs. It doesn't have to be 3. It can be 2. It can be 6, within that range usually. And then we have our conclusion where we reiterate our main points.